Everybody to my channel about homesteading. My name is Paul. I'm a practicing real estate professional in the state of Virginia, and I live in the Shenandoah Valley. And today I'm going to talk more about the beauty and the lovely lifestyle we all know as homesteading. There are a lot of young people today who I see on YouTube, and maybe their parents raised them in the city, or some of them went to some really nice schools, and they're intelligent people and they want to make a new lifestyle, so they start looking into the proper possibility of living out in the countryside. And it's a whole new world for those people. But a lot of people my age, I'm 69 years old, so I'm kind of in the middle here. A lot of people my age, when they were living in a suburb when they were growing up, I grew up in the countryside and I went to high school in a very rural area as well. So I have that experience. But my parents' generation, so many of them grew up on a farm. My mom's dad was a farmer and also a professor as well, but he had little country farmers, and there was a whole lot of farmers back in the old days. And little by little, what happened was these people said, okay, this farming is so hard, I'm getting a little older, the kids are saying, okay, I'm going to go into the city now, and a lot of the people in my generation, they said, okay, mom, dad, it's great, but I'm going to college in California, and I'm going to go get a job in New York City or Washington, D.C., and, I'll come and visit you now and then out in the Idaho or wherever it is. So that's what happened. There's a drain from the countryside out to the back into the cities. But what happens is, of course, the people in the city still need food. So for a long time, they had the trains, the canals. They said, okay, I got to go to a job in the city, but I got to get some food. So they have ships and trucks, and there was born the pickup truck, as we had made a little video about that. The pickup truck was born because they say, okay, now the farm's a little bit further from my home, so I got to take a bunch of my sacks of potatoes or whatever I'm growing and take them into the marketplace in the city. And little by little, these whole systems develop, and now it's just like these huge farms in some parts of the country. But Virginia has a lot of really small farms still, because the land is good, the water is good, and they're having success at farming. I'm astounded, actually. I moved here 6 years ago from upstate New York. Upstate New York has a lot of rural areas, but it's fairly rugged. The Catskills are really steep, and you just don't get the pastoral landscapes of farms, of cattle running around, and streams running down the valley, and you just don't get that in some areas like the Rocky Mountains or up in the Adirondacks. It's just a lot more steep and rugged and colder and bitter. So Virginia has a long tradition of active homesteading. There's still so much of it going on right now because the land is in production. Even if people just have their own house, and maybe they don't really, quote, farm on a big scale anymore, but maybe they grew up on a farm, so they retain some of that, and maybe they only have 5 or 6 acres, but they'll have a pickup truck and probably a tractor and maybe a few animals and so on. So there's so many advantages of living the lifestyle like that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them today. One of them is the health. If you live out in the countryside, generally speaking, you're going to be in more rhythmic feel of the land. Just outdoor doing activities, whether maybe you're shoveling snow, okay, that's a bummer, but there's other things that you do outdoors in the summertime too, maybe clearing some land and trees and so on, and bush hogging, and maybe some weed whacking and some chopping and all those kind of things. You just get a activity. See, I'm 69 years old, and I still have really good muscle tone and great health, and I can do almost everything I could do when I was 50 years old, and I can still fly a little airplane. So the country lifestyle is very good for health. It's great for children. They get a kinesthetic environment. They get to touch the flowers, where they get to know where food comes from. They get to play and without the restrictions as much. And so it's a very, very different lifestyle. Now, the funny thing is about how this whole thing evolved, because years ago, my generation, many of us did grow up in a city, and some of us grew up on the countryside like I did. Not particularly on a farm, but I was in a rural area because I grew up in some mountains. But what happened, and little by little, there's still people out there with the farms, and some of the people just still had the city life, and they kept the farm in the family, and they handed it down and so on, and maybe they finally sold it to an operating farmer. But there's a lot of little homesteads in Virginia that retain that. And what happens is when people went to city long ago, and they just, especially my parents' generation or my generation who grew up in this America, right around the 50s, 60s, they're all saying, okay, they got their city job, or like the Mad Men show, and they're all gung ho on the metropolitan lifestyle. But they want to have a little bit of the country, so they get to have their little yard. They get a little yard and maybe a little garden, and maybe there's a room for their one pet or something. So they go from a bigger dog and bigger cattle out in the countryside, but they want to retain some of that feeling of suburb and, hey, I want that country life. And even to this day, if you go looking in a suburb, people look at the yard. Oh, honey, look, the kids can play here so nicely. It's beautiful here. We got some space, we got some privacy, we got some trees. People love that stuff even today. But out in the country, boy, there's a lot of trees. You might have too many trees. So there's a whole different attitude when you come out in the country now, because a lot of people who grew up in the city, or maybe they had a combination lifestyle, maybe they had an acre or two and they were in one of those suburban places, and now they're out there and their dog doesn't even need to have a leash maybe. And it'll just run and come back to you, hopefully, but they usually come home for food. So what I'm saying is that there's a very different aspect of living in the country now for young people, because they don't know it, and for them, maybe they saw the show Green Acres long ago, a really silly show. A lot of people my age know about that one. There's a funny song about Green Acres, the place to be. But it is a really beautiful place to live, and there's, again, the recreation is very close by here. Where I live, there's canoeing, kayaking, hiking, trail walking, horses, what do you want, There's also skiing. If you go up and down the mountains behind me, you go, West Virginia is off the one side, and then even if you go down Route 81, which is near where I live, you can shoot down to North Carolina. Some pretty good skiing down there too at different times of the year, of course during certain seasons. So you have your recreation nearby, you got some of your food nearby, you got your kids playing nearby, you don't have to, it's much more secure. There's hardly any crime out in the countryside. Honestly, I mean, there are people here, first of all, the kind of people who want to live out in the country generally aren't going running around looking and thinking of something to steal in someone's house. Now and then there are a few burglaries here and there and so on, and maybe some domestic violence or something, but typically, there's very, very, very little crime out in the countryside, and people protect themselves. And people who live out here know that they protect themselves. You don't want to walk into a stranger's house in the countryside, because there'll be a couple of dogs and a gun in your face, most likely. So, again, moving back to country is a return to the roots of this country and what is common in most parts of the world today. If you travel a bit like I have, you'll see that in many, many parts of the world, even in Europe and even up in Switzerland, they got to have cows. Okay, whatever they can do on their own land. Maybe they can't grow big wheat crops like they can in some parts of the world up in the mountains, but they can have goats or chickens or cows or produce eggs or do something. So essentially, going to the rural lifestyle, the beauty of the lifestyle is that it's the most natural way for human beings to live, where you have a community. You typically get to know some of your neighbors. A lot of times you're very helpful to each other. You don't necessarily depend on your neighbors, but down then there's some good sharing that goes on out in the countryside. It always happens. So there's a lot of advantages, and I love the countryside. And anybody who's considering, please consider Virginia, because we really, really love homesteaders here. I just was out driving today, and I swear, everywhere I was looking, there's another homestead, and they got this, and they got that, and they got this shed, they got the cows, they got this and that, and there's so many of them here. And they're actually not that many for sale, because people use them and they produce with them. And there's so many smaller towns where they're not the oversized towns, but you can go to a reasonable town like Roanoke or Lynchburg or Waynesboro, and you can have all the conveniences of that lifestyle, but you drive 20 minutes out of the town and you can be out in a very rural area where you can shoot a .22 off your back porch. You see, that's how it is out in the rural lifestyle, because all the natural things that people need to do, like walking, and there are people in New York City that I feel like they're prisoners. I've been to New York City many, many times. They've been into some apartments, and yeah, there's a nice apartment, but I don't know if I want to live here because, well, if you want to see a tree or a nice tree with the grass near it where you can sit down there, you got to walk over and take the subway up to the park or do something like that, where the country is just full of that. And I encourage people, I almost beg people, please come to the country. Young people, bring out your kids here, raise them out here, buy some land, start a homestead, buy the basics of a homestead. I made a bunch of other videos about this, but there's ways that you can kind of get into homesteading rather inexpensively if you just strategize and consider that you're going to start on one like a seed and you're going to build it. It's not going to be like you buy this thing and it's an instant farm. I mean, if you have money, you can do that, but chances are you don't want to. Make it your own. And there's a lot of elements that you'll need, and I've concluded them in many of my other videos, but you'll need certain tools and supplies and knowledge and so on. But I don't want to make these videos too long. I really appreciate liking and sharing and feedback. I like to share what I've known about homesteading. I've traveled to many cities. I've been to many cosmopolitan places, and New York City more times than I want to remember. But I love the country living because it offers so many benefits, and I'm 69 years old and still in robust health and enjoying the lovely outdoor living. So thanks again for listening, and please like and share and subscribe if you'd like to get more messages from me. Okay, bye.